"Daddy's coming, baby. Daddy's always coming home." That was the promise Ethan Carter whispered to himself every single night, the one thing keeping his foot on the gas when every rational instinct screamed at him to pull over and wait out the storm. But tonight the storm had other plans. Because there she was, a luxury SUV half swallowed by the edge of Harlan Pass engine, still running one wrong gust of wind away from disappearing into the white nothing below. And inside that car was the last person on Earth Ethan Carter ever wanted to save. If this story already has you gripping your seat, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And don't you dare go anywhere, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about kindness loss and second chances. The snow didn't fall that night. It attacked. It came sideways in sheets and walls, in punishing curtains of white that turned Harlan Pass into something barely recognizable as a road. Ethan Carter had driven this mountain route 100 times, maybe more, but never like this. Never when the lane markers had completely vanished beneath 6 inches of fresh powder. Never when the guardrails were just suggestions buried under ice. Never when the wind hit the truck so hard it actually slid a full foot, maybe more, toward the edge before his hands corrected. How was gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone pale 20 minutes ago. His phone sat in the cup holder screen, dark signal dead. The radio was nothing but static, and the occasional ghost of a weather alert he'd already heard 3 times. Blizzard conditions on Harlan Pass. Travelers are strongly advised. He'd stopped listening after the first time. Because he couldn't stop. Couldn't pull over. Couldn't wait. Sophie was waiting. That was the only thought that mattered. His 6-year-old daughter Sophie, who sat at the front window every single night with her face pressed against the glass, leaving a little fog circle from her breath, watching for his headlights to come up the driveway. His mother had called him at the last gas station with a signal 40 miles back to tell him Sophie had already eaten dinner and refused to go to bed. "She said she's waiting for you, Ethan. You know how she gets." Yeah. He knew how she got. She got exactly like her father. Stubborn. Patient. Loyal in a way that made your chest ache. 15 more miles, he said out loud, to no one, to himself, to the dark. 15 miles, Soph. I'm coming. The truck crept forward, and that's when he saw it. At first, it didn't register as a car. It was just a shape, a dark angular mass at the edge of his headlights, half buried and half hanging, tilted at an angle that made his stomach drop the moment his brain caught up to what his eyes were seeing. A vehicle, a big one, luxury SUV, black or maybe dark blue, perched at the very lip of the cliffside, where the guardrail had simply given up. One section was bent completely outward, hanging useless over the drop, and the SUV was nosed against that gap, front wheels already over the edge, rear end still on the road, engine running, exhaust rising in small, desperate clouds into the frozen air. Ethan hit the brakes. The truck fishtailed. His heart slammed against his ribs. He corrected, slowed, brought the truck to a stop about 30 feet back, hazards blinking orange into the white dark. For a moment, and he would never fully admit how long that moment actually lasted, he just sat there. He could see the exhaust. That meant the engine was still on. That meant someone was in there. Or had been. "Drive," said a voice in his head. A quiet, cold, rational voice. "Drive, Ethan. Sophie is waiting. Whoever that is, they have a phone. Someone will come. The roads are dangerous. You have a child at home who needs her father alive." It wasn't a cruel voice. It was a survival voice. The kind of voice that had kept him going for 3 years, since everything fell apart, since the factory, since the layoffs, since the careful, quiet unraveling of everything he'd built. He sat with his hand on the gear shift. The exhaust kept rising. Someone is in that car. Damn it, he said, and he got out. The cold hit him like a physical thing, not wind, not temperature, but something meaner and more personal. It grabbed his face, slapped the air out of his lungs, and immediately began working on his fingers, even through his gloves. He pulled his jacket tighter and moved toward the SUV in a low, careful crouch, testing every step before he committed his weight to it. The road was pure ice under the snow. He could feel it shifting, groaning slightly with the wind. The SUV wasn't moving, but it wasn't stable either. He could see the front end flexing just slightly with the gusts. The drop on the other side of that guardrail was real. He'd driven this road in daylight. He knew what was down there. He reached the passenger side door and wiped the snow away from the window with his forearm. There was someone in the driver's seat. A woman. She was conscious barely. Her head was tilted against the headrest at an awkward angle, and there was a smear of blood across her temple from where it had apparently connected with the window. The airbag had deployed and was now deflated across the steering wheel like a collapsed lung. She was blinking slow, confused blinks, the kind that told Ethan her brain wasn't fully online yet. He tried the passenger door. Locked. He knocked on the window. Hard, sharp raps. Hey, can you hear me? You need to unlock the door." She turned her head toward him. Her eyes found his through the glass. Something flickered in them, recognition that there was another person maybe, but not much beyond that. "Unlock the door." He mimed it with his hand. "The handle right there, pull it up." She moved, slowly. Reached out with one hand, fumbled, missed, tried again. The lock clicked. Ethan yanked the passenger door open, and the dome light came on, and he got his first real look at her. She was maybe mid-40s though. Stress or money or both had kept her somewhere that made that hard to pin down exactly. Dark hair, expensive cut, now tangled and matted on the left side with blood and melting snow. She was wearing a tailored charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, completely absurdly wrong for these conditions, like she'd stepped out of a boardroom and directly into the middle of a natural disaster. Which Ethan would realize later was almost exactly what had happened. Her eyes found his face. Sharp, dark eyes, even through the days, there was something watchful in them. Something used to measuring. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "You're hanging off a cliff," Ethan said. "I'm aware." "Then you know you're not fine." She blinked at him. "Who are you?" "Someone who stopped. Can you move your legs?" A pause. She looked down at her own body like she was conducting an inventory. "Yes. Any pain in your neck? Your spine? Did your head hit anything hard?" "The window. I'm fine. Yeah, you said that." He kept his voice even, but his eyes were already moving, checking the angle of the vehicle, feeling the subtle, awful shift of it in the wind. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to very carefully slide across to this seat. Don't push against anything on the driver's side. Don't shift your weight suddenly. Just slide. Slow." She stared at him. "Now," he said. "Please." Something in his tone, calm and completely non-negotiable, seemed to cut through whatever fog she was operating in. She began to move. It took 90 seconds that felt like 20 minutes. Ethan had one hand on her arm and one hand gripping the doorframe, and he was very aware of every small groan the chassis made, every tiny degree of shift in the front end's position. When she finally cleared the center console and her weight transferred to the passenger side, he heard the vehicle settle, not fall, just settle, and he exhaled something he'd been holding in his chest without knowing it. "Step down onto the road," he said. "My truck is back there. Walk toward the lights." She stepped out. Her heel immediately hit ice and she grabbed the doorframe. Her shoes, he saw them now, low-heeled leather pumps, were already soaked through. "Those shoes," he said. "I know," she said. "You're going to fall." "I know that too." She didn't ask for help. She straightened up, gripped the side of the SUV, and began picking her way toward his truck, with the careful, furious focus of someone who refused to fall. He watched her for 1 second, just one, and then looked back at the SUV. Her purse was still on the passenger seat. He grabbed it. His hands found the door handle of the SUV, and he hesitated, looking at the phone mounted on the dash. He grabbed that too. Then he stepped back, closed the door carefully, and walked away. 30 seconds later, the wind shifted. Behind him, he heard the slow, grinding shriek of metal on asphalt, and then a crash, distant, final, echoing up from the darkness below. He didn't look back. She was in the passenger seat of his truck when he climbed in, sitting very upright, hands folded in her lap, blood still tracking slowly down the left side of her face. She looked like she was sitting in a waiting room, like she'd decided that whatever her body was doing, Shaking slightly, breathing too carefully, was not going to be visible to a stranger. Ethan turned the heat up full and handed her the spare work gloves from his center console. They were too big and stained, and she put them on without a word. "There's no cell signal up here," he said. "I know, I tried." "How long were you in that car?" "I'm not sure. 20 minutes, maybe more." A pause. The road was icing over faster than the GPS accounted for. "It does that up here." She turned to look at him, that measuring look again, sharper now that her head was clearing. "You're very calm." "One of us has to be." She almost said something. He could see it, some reflex, some boardroom response about not needing someone to be calm on her behalf. But she stopped herself. "I'm Victoria Hale," she said instead. And there it was. Ethan went very still. He kept his eyes on the road. His hands stayed exactly where they were on the wheel. His face did not move. But something shifted inside him. Something tightened up behind his sternum, the way it does when a word arrives that your body recognizes before your brain has fully processed it. Hale. Victoria Hale. Hale Industries. The acquisition. The efficiency review. The closure notice that had gone up on the factory floor on a Tuesday morning in March, and the way 300 men and women had stood there reading it in silence before someone in the back said, "No, just that, just no," and then the noise had started. He had stood on that floor. He had read that notice. He had driven home that Tuesday and sat in his truck in the driveway for 45 minutes before he could make himself go inside and face Sophie and his mother and the particular terror of not knowing how you were going to keep the lights on. She was sitting in his passenger seat. Victoria Hale. "Ethan Carter," he said. His voice came out even, steady. He was almost surprised by that. She nodded once, polite. The name meant nothing to her. Of course it didn't. There were 300 names that meant nothing to her. 300 families. 300 lives that had rearranged themselves around a decision made in a boardroom she probably didn't even have to raise her voice in. "We need to get off this mountain," he said. "Yes, the road back down is worse than what you came up. If this keeps up." He glanced at the windshield, at the wall of white in the headlights. "We may need to find shelter before we make the bottom." "You're saying we might not make it down tonight." "I'm saying we might not make it down safely. Those are different things." She absorbed this. "What's the alternative?" "There's a ranger station, maybe 3 miles up. It's off-season, but those cabins are built to stay standing. If it gets bad enough, we stop there. And if it doesn't, then we keep driving and I get you to a hospital at the base." He paused. "You hit your head. You need to stay awake." "I'm awake." "I know. I'm telling you to stay that way." Another long pause. "You stopped," she said. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more like puzzlement, like a calculation she couldn't quite finish. The road was dangerous. Most people wouldn't have stopped. Ethan kept his eyes forward. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 6. She sits at the window every night until she sees my headlights." He felt Victoria look at him. "If it were her in that car," he said, "I'd want someone to stop." The truck pushed forward into the white dark. The wind screamed against the windows. Somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the focus and the calm and the careful management of every variable in front of him, Ethan Carter heard Sophie's voice. "Daddy's coming, baby," and held onto it like a rope. Outside, Harlan Pass disappeared completely under the snow, and the storm, seemingly satisfied that it now had both of them, began to close in. 20 minutes later, it was clear they weren't making the bottom. Ethan had slowed to a crawl, 15 miles an hour, then 10, then something barely above a roll, because the visibility had collapsed to almost nothing. He was navigating by instinct and memory, and the occasional reflective post that emerged from the white, long enough to confirm he was still on something resembling a road. Victoria had not spoken much, but she was awake, he could tell by the quality of her silence. She was watching everything, processing, recalibrating the way people who run large organizations always seem to be doing, even when they're bleeding from the head in a stranger's truck. "There," he said, "A shape to the right. Dark timber walls. A small sign half buried in snow. Harlan Pass Ranger Station, and a turnoff that was nothing but two faint depressions in the snow where tire tracks used to be. He pulled off. "This is it?" she asked. "This is it." "It's not open." "No." "So how do we get in?" He looked at her. "I break a window." She stared at him. "That's illegal, yes. You want to stay in the truck." A long pause. "No," she said. "Then let's go." He had a flashlight. He had the emergency kit from behind the seat. He had 20 years of working with his hands and knowing how things were built and how they came apart. The cabin had a simple latch-style lock on a side window, the kind installed in 1987 and never updated, and it took him 45 seconds and a flathead screwdriver to persuade it. He helped her through the window. She didn't object to the help this time. Inside, the air was barely warmer than outside, just stale, and still no wind, which made it feel like a different country after what they'd been walking through. The beam of his flashlight found a wood stove in the corner, a stack of firewood against the wall. Not much. Maybe a night's worth, a metal shelf with some canned goods, and a folded emergency blanket. 2 cots against opposite walls. A table. 2 chairs. Victoria stood in the center of the room and turned in a slow circle. She had run companies with thousands of employees. She had sat in rooms where decisions moved markets and rewrote lives. She had probably never stood in a space this small, this stripped down, this honest. "It'll do," Ethan said. He was already at the wood stove. "What can I do?" she asked. He looked up. The question surprised him, not its content, but its tone. There was no performance in it, no management. Just a person in a cold room asking what needed doing. "Check those shelves," he said. "Tell me what we have." She moved to the shelves. He built the fire, and outside, Harlan Pass vanished entirely beneath the storm. The fire caught on the 3rd try. It wasn't much, not at first. Small and tentative, feeling its way through damp wood that had been sitting cold for months. But Ethan fed it carefully with the patience of a man who understood that some things couldn't be forced, only coaxed. He stayed low in front of the stove for 10 minutes, feeding it small pieces until it decided to commit. When the first real wave of heat pushed out into the room, Victoria let out a breath she'd been holding. She was sitting on one of the cots, the emergency blanket around her shoulders, an inventory of the shelf beside her on the table. 2 cans of soup. 1 can of beans. A small pack of crackers sealed. 3 tea packets and a tin of instant coffee. A basic first aid kit, the kind with bandages and antiseptic wipes, and not much else. "Not exactly room service," she said. "No." "The soup is vegetable. Is that acceptable?" "It's hot. Everything else is a bonus." He sat back on his heels, watching the fire through the grate. His phone said 9:47 p.m. Still no signal. The storm outside was getting louder, not quieter. He thought of Sophie at the window. He thought of his mother gently trying to get her to come to bed, and Sophie with her palm flat against the cold glass, watching the dark. "You should let me look at your head," he said. Victoria's hand went automatically to her temple. She'd mostly stopped bleeding, the cold had helped with that, but the cut needed cleaning at least. "It's fine." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep meaning it." "Ms. Hale." He said it flat. Not unkind, just certain. "You have a head wound, you were in a crash, and you've been in the cold. Let me look at it." A silence. "Victoria," she said. He glanced at her. "If you're going to insist on examining my head, you can use my first name." Something moved across his face, not a smile, not quite. But something. "All right. Victoria, sit still." He opened the first aid kit. He cleaned the cut. She didn't flinch, which either meant it didn't hurt, or she had extraordinary control, and he suspected the latter. The wound was superficial. Long, but not deep. He closed it as best he could with 2 of the small butterfly closures from the kit. "You've done this before," she said. "My daughter is 6. I've done everything before." "Is she?" She stopped. "Is she what? Is she alone tonight?" "No. Her grandmother's there." He pressed the second closure gently. "She's safe. She's just waiting. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, she's lucky to have someone to wait for. There was something underneath that something layered and old and not meant to be said out loud. He noticed it. He didn't press. Done, he said. He put the kit down and moved back to the fire. Try to sleep if you can. I'll keep the fire going. You're not going to sleep. One of us needs to stay up. I can take shifts. He looked at her. You have a concussion. Probable concussion. You don't know that for certain. I know enough. He settled into the chair nearest the stove. Sleep, Victoria. She looked at him for a long moment. That measuring look, the one that had probably served her very well in rooms full of people who wanted something from her rooms, where every word and pause was strategic. But this wasn't one of those rooms, and he wasn't one of those people. Finally, she lay back on the cot and pulled the emergency blanket over herself. The fire crackled. The wind hit the walls in waves, sometimes a moan, sometimes a shriek, sometimes something lower and more sustained that sounded less like weather and more like a warning. Ethan stared at the fire. 15 miles. Sophie was 15 miles from here, pressed against a cold window, breathing fog circles onto the glass. I'm coming, baby, he thought. Just not tonight. Outside, the storm settled in like it owned the mountain. And inside the cabin, two people who should never have been in the same room sat on opposite sides of a small fire, each carrying things the other couldn't yet see. But the night was still young, and the storm had not even begun to do its real work. Ethan didn't sleep. He told himself it was because someone needed to keep the fire alive. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that his mind wouldn't stop running. Sophie at the window. The sound of that SUV going over the edge 30 seconds after he'd pulled Victoria out of it, and the name. That name that sat in the back of his skull like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. Victoria Hale. He fed another piece of wood into the stove and watched the fire eat it. She was sleeping or trying to. He could tell by her breathing that it wasn't deep, wasn't restful. She was doing that thing people do when they're exhausted, but their body hasn't fully stood down from the emergency yet. Short breaths, small adjustments, the occasional sharp inhale when a gust hit the wall hard enough to make the whole cabin shudder. He checked his phone again. 11:14 p.m. Still no signal. The battery was at 62%, and he turned the screen off fast to conserve it. 15 miles. Sophie would be asleep by now. His mother would have finally persuaded her. He held on to that. He built a picture of it in his mind, Sophie in her yellow pajamas, the ones with the small ducks on them that she'd picked out herself and wore until they were thin at the knees, curled on her side with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Safe. Warm. Asleep. He was so focused on that picture that he almost missed the sound. A soft sound, from the cot. He looked over. Victoria was sitting up. Not panicked, not confused, just sitting up, the emergency blanket folded back, her hands in her lap, staring at the middle distance with an expression he recognized. It was the expression of someone who had just lost an argument with their own mind. Can't sleep, he said quietly. I don't sleep well. A pause. Under normal circumstances. These are not normal circumstances. No. She looked at the stove. Is there enough wood? Enough to get through the night if I'm careful. She nodded, pulled the blanket back around her shoulders. Then, what time is it? A little after 11. The storm sounds worse. It is worse. She absorbed that without comment. Then she stood carefully testing her balance for a beat before committing and crossed to the chair on the other side of the stove. She sat down across from him, the fire between them, and pulled her knees up slightly under the blanket, like a person settling in for a long conversation or a long silence. Either way, she wasn't going back to that cot. Ethan said nothing. He understood the need to be upright, to be present, to refuse the particular vulnerability of lying flat in a strange place, while everything outside your control was running its own program. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the fire and the storm. Then Victoria said, "Tell me about her." He looked up. Sophie. Yes. I wasn't sure why he answered. Maybe because it was nearly midnight and they were trapped in a box in the middle of a mountain in a blizzard, and the normal rules about what you said to strangers simply didn't apply anymore. Maybe because saying her name out loud made her feel closer. "She's 6, he said. "She'll be 7 in April. She's—" He stopped, smiled without meaning to. "She's the loudest quiet kid you'll ever meet. She doesn't make noise, but she takes up every room she's in. You know what I mean?" "I think so. She draws, constantly. There are drawings on every surface in our house. I found one on the back of a gas bill last week, a horse," she said. "Though I thought it looked more like a very elongated dog, and she was offended by that." He shook his head. "She's got opinions, strong ones, about everything." "She sounds like someone I'd respect," Victoria said. The honesty of that caught him slightly off guard. He looked at her. She meant it, he could see that. There was no performance in it, no attempt to connect or impress, just a simple direct statement. "Yeah," he said. "She's worth respecting." Victoria looked at the fire. Her mother. The question landed gently. Not prying, just out there. An acknowledgement that there was a gap in the story. "Gone," Ethan said. 3 years ago. Cancer. He said it the way people say things they've said 1,000 times, flat and clean, all the rough edges worn off by repetition. It was fast, 6 months from diagnosis. "I'm sorry." "Yeah." He stoked the fire once. "Sophie was 3. She doesn't have many real memories. Just impressions, I think. The shape of her. The feeling of her." Victoria was quiet. Then she said, "That might be worse, in some ways." "Yeah," he said again, "in some ways." The wind hit the cabin in a long, sustained push that made the walls creak, and both of them went very still for a second, waiting to see if it would stop. It stopped. Victoria exhaled. "How did you end up on Harlan Pass tonight?" "Work. I run a small crew maintenance contracts for commercial buildings in Kellerton. A burst pipe at one of the office complex's emergency call took most of the day." He paused. "This is the fastest route home. I didn't know there were maintenance crews operating out of Kellerton. I thought the economic base there had significantly contracted." The words landed so neutrally. Significantly contracted, like a quarterly report, like a line item. "It did," Ethan said. His voice stayed even. "A few years back, a lot of people lost work. The manufacturing sector took a major hit across this entire region." "It did." She nodded slowly, thoughtfully, like a woman reviewing a decision she'd already made, and finding it still justified on paper. Like she was on the far side of a glass wall from what those words actually meant when they landed on a person. Ethan looked at the fire. Not yet, he told himself. Not yet. Because there was a version of this conversation that happened right now in the dark, when they were both raw and tired, and she was injured, and he was wound up with worry about Sophie. And that version would come out ugly. It would come out as anger and accusation, and she would defend herself, and the whole thing would collapse into two people shouting past each other in a freezing cabin. He didn't want that. He didn't fully know what he wanted. But he knew it wasn't that. "You should drink some water," he said instead. "Hydration matters with a head injury." She recognized the redirect. He could see it. She accepted it. "There's water. I've got a bottle in my kit. Here." He pulled it from his bag by his chair and held it out. She took it. Their fingers didn't quite touch. She drank, set the bottle on her knee, looked at the fire. "I was coming from a meeting in Burlington," she said. "Annual board review. I decided to drive back tonight instead of staying over." A pause. "My assistant told me to stay. She checked the weather and she told me." Another pause, smaller. "I told her I preferred to make my own decisions about my own time." "That sounds about right," Ethan said. She looked at him sharply, but there was something in his tone, dry, not cruel, that stopped her from taking it as an attack. She almost laughed. It didn't make it all the way out, but he could see it trying. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it does." The fire popped. A log shifted. Ethan reached forward and adjusted the damper to slow the burn, always conserving the habit of a man who had learned in the last 3 years that everything ran out faster than you planned. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. You can ask. Why maintenance? You clearly know how to think under pressure. How to handle... She gestured vaguely at the room, at the fire, at the entire situation. All of this. You have skills that are worth more than... I had a career, he said, quiet, still even. I was a plant supervisor, 15 years. I knew every machine on that floor by sound. I could walk through and tell you which one was running wrong just by listening. He picked up the poker and turned a log. Then the plant closed, and plant supervisors aren't exactly in high demand when there's no plant. He set the poker down. Maintenance was what was hiring, so that's what I do. Victoria was silent. Something was shifting in her face, a small, careful rearrangement. He didn't look at her long enough to read it fully. What plant? She said. Her voice was different now, slightly lower. Ethan looked at her then, directly, for the first time since they'd been sitting by this fire. Crestwood Fabrication, he said. Crestwood, about 40 miles south of here. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone who didn't know the answer. It was the silence of someone who did. Victoria Hale set the water bottle down on the floor very carefully, like she was buying herself a second. Then she straightened. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes stayed on the fire, but they had gone somewhere else, somewhere internal, somewhere where calculations were running fast and quiet. Hale Industries acquired Crestwood Fabrication, she said. Measured. 4 years ago. Yes. The closure was part of a consolidation review. Yes. The decision was based on 300 people lost their jobs. He said it simply. No heat, no volume. Just the weight of the number placed on the floor between them, like something that couldn't be picked back up. 300 people in a town where there wasn't much else hiring. Families. People who'd worked that floor for 20 years. People who didn't have LinkedIn profiles and weren't going to pivot to the tech sector. He paused. I was one of them. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm hit the wall again. A long, low sound, like something enormous pressing its shoulder against the cabin and testing. Victoria said nothing. And Ethan let the silence stay, because the silence was doing something that words couldn't. It was filling the room with what was real. Not the quarterly review. Not the consolidation strategy. Not the efficiency metrics that had made the decision look clean on paper. 300 people. He was one of them. I was sitting across from her. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled, but he could hear something underneath it, some fracture hairline thin. I didn't know who you were when you stopped. I know. If you'd known before you got out of that truck. She stopped, seemed to reconsider something. Then more honestly, would you have stopped? Ethan looked at the fire for a long time. Yeah, he said finally. I would have. Why? Because Sophie might be watching. He said it simply, without drama. She's 6 years old and she watches everything I do, and I can't teach her who to save and who to leave. That's not... He shook his head slowly. That's not a lesson I'm willing to give her. Victoria looked at him, and this time the measuring quality in her eyes had changed into something else, something less certain of itself, something younger. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I'm not... She stopped. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like an excuse. Then don't say it as an excuse. A long pause. The consolidation review was economically sound. I know it was. The numbers. I know the numbers. I saw the numbers. My union rep walked us through the whole thing. He looked at her. The numbers were fine. The numbers were right. The decision made sense from where you were sitting. He paused. I just want you to know where I was sitting. The fire burned between them. A driveway, he said quietly. 45 minutes. Sitting in my truck in my driveway, trying to figure out how to go inside and tell my 6-year-old daughter's grandmother that I didn't know how we were going to keep the lights on. He didn't raise his voice. That's where I was sitting. Victoria Hale put her hands over her face. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not a performance. It was small and sudden, and completely unguarded, the gesture of a person whose armor had just developed a crack too large to manage. She held them there for a moment, then lowered them. Her eyes were dry. Just. I hear what you're saying, she said. And then quieter. I'm hearing it. Ethan nodded. He didn't press. He didn't need to. He put another piece of wood in the stove and sat back in his chair. Outside, the storm screamed across the top of the mountain. The window above the cots rattled hard in its frame. A sudden violent shudder that made Victoria's head come up fast, eyes alert, body gone rigid. It's okay, Ethan said. It's just wind. I know what it is, she said. But she didn't relax. He watched her from across the fire. Watched the careful reassembly of composure happening in real time. The straightened spine, the slow breath, the deliberate relaxation of the hands. She was good at it. Years of practice. He wondered what it cost her, all that practice. He wondered if she ever let it drop fully with anyone. Your assistant, he said. The one who told you to stay. Margaret. Does she know where you are? A pause. She knows my route. She'll have flagged it when I stopped checking in. She glanced toward her phone, which was charging off his truck's external battery pack, the one he'd thought to grab before they left the truck. When we get signal, she'll already have search and rescue moving. Good. He meant it. Not for himself, for her. Because she was sitting here with a closed head wound and a core temperature. He was watching more closely than he'd let on, and morning was still a long way off. Ethan. She said his name differently than before. The first time she'd said it, it was just the return of a name's social reflex. This was different. This was someone using a name because they'd decided to mean it. What you did tonight, getting out of that truck. She stopped. You don't have to. I know I don't. She looked at him. That's why I want to. He waited. Most people would have kept driving, she said. And I would not. I would have had no right to blame them. The road was dangerous. They had no obligation. She paused. You had no obligation. No, he agreed. But you stopped anyway, for a stranger. And then you found out that stranger was... She didn't finish that sentence. Yeah, he said. And you still... Another unfinished sentence. Yeah. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Not tonight. He settled deeper in his chair. Tonight we just keep the fire going. Victoria looked at the stove for a long moment. Then she pulled the blanket tighter around herself, leaned back slightly in the chair, and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, he could tell. Just to stop looking at the world for a minute. Tell me more about Sophie, she said. Her voice was quiet. And something in it, some quality he hadn't heard in it before, was asking not for information. Was asking for warmth. Ethan looked at the fire. She's afraid of thunderstorms, he said. But not snowstorms. She calls snowstorms the quiet. She says it's when the sky is thinking. He paused. She might like tonight, actually. If she were here. A long silence. The storm pressed at the walls. She sounds extraordinary, Victoria said softly. She is, Ethan said. She's the only thing I've ever done completely right. Victoria didn't respond to that. But he heard her breath shift, a small, involuntary thing. Like a word she swallowed. The fire burned on. The mountain held them. And somewhere in the dark, between the wind and the warmth and the weight of everything that had been said and not said, something small and irreversible began to change. The breaking point. She fell asleep in the chair. Ethan noticed the exact moment it happened. The small surrender of her shoulders, the way her chin dropped a quarter inch, the breathing finally going slow and even. He didn't wake her. He just pulled his jacket off and crossed the room quietly and laid it over her lap without touching her, and then went back to his chair and kept watching the fire. It was past 2 in the morning now. The storm had not softened. If anything, it had found a second gear sometime around midnight and was running on it hard. The kind of sustained, purposeful assault that stopped feeling like weather and started feeling like intention. The cabin absorbed it. The walls flexed slightly and creaked and settled, and the stove worked steadily, and Ethan sat in the orange half-dark and thought about everything and tried to think about nothing. He was almost out of wood. He'd known it was coming. He'd been rationing carefully, feeding the fire small pieces and letting it burn low between additions. But the math had been clear for the last hour. The stack against the wall was down to 4 pieces. Maybe 5 hours of heat if he was disciplined. Maybe less if the temperature outside kept dropping and the cabin walls kept losing the argument with it. He looked at the remaining wood for a long time. Then he looked at Victoria. Her color was better than it had been when he'd pulled her from the car. The bleeding had stopped completely. She was breathing slow and even. Those were good signs. But her hands resting on top of his jacket in her lap still had a faint blue tinge around the nails that he didn't like. Her core temperature was the thing he couldn't see and couldn't measure and couldn't stop thinking about. She needed to stay warm through the night. That was the job. Everything else was secondary. He turned back to the fire and fed it one more piece of wood and promised himself he'd figure out the rest when he had to. He picked up his phone, tried the signal one more time out of something that was closer to ritual than hope. Nothing. He switched on the flashlight app for a moment and aimed it at the window above the cots just to get a read on conditions. The glass was completely opaque with ice on the outside. The snow was piled against the lower frame nearly to the sill. They weren't going anywhere until this broke. He turned the flashlight off. "You're worrying," Victoria said. He looked over. She was awake or had never fully gone under. Her eyes were open and watching him with that particular quality she had, the one that saw more than it announced. "I'm thinking," he said, "about the wood." He looked at the stack. Among other things, she sat up straighter, adjusting his jacket across her lap. She glanced at the remaining pieces, did her own calculation, and arrived at the same place he had. He could see it happen. "How long?" "If I'm careful through dawn, maybe. And if you're not careful, then we have a problem around 4 a.m. She nodded. "What are the options?" "I break up the table and the chairs if it comes to it. Wood is wood. The ranger station can bill me." Something crossed her face, almost a smile, not quite. "I'll cover the damages." "I know you will." The fire popped. She shifted in the chair. His jacket slid slightly, and she caught it and resettled it. And for a moment, they were just two people in a warm adjacent room in the middle of a mountain blizzard, managing the specific practical problem of staying alive. And it was almost simple. Then Victoria said, "Tell me his name." Ethan went still. "Whose name?" "Someone specific, from Crestwood." She was looking at the fire. Her voice was careful and deliberate, like she was walking out onto ice and testing every step. "You said 300 people. I want a name. One real person, not a number." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I've been sitting here for 3 hours, and every time I close my eyes, I see spreadsheets," she said. "And I'm tired of seeing spreadsheets." Ethan was quiet for the moment. Then, Ray Kowalski, 58 years old, worked the floor for 22 years. He was a line lead, best one we had. He knew those machines better than the engineers who designed them. He paused. His wife has MS. The insurance was the thing. The job itself he could have figured out. But the insurance, when that went, everything went. He stopped. "Last I heard, they'd had to sell the house. They're renting a room from his wife's sister in Dunmore." The fire burned. Victoria's hands tightened in her lap. "I didn't know that," she said. "No. I mean that specifically, that individual." "I know what you mean." The insurance continuation options were outlined in the severance. The COBRA premiums were 4 times what most of those families could afford on unemployment, Ethan said. Steady, not angry, just clear. It was in the packet. It looked like an option. It wasn't an option. She absorbed that. Her jaw moved slightly, like she was working something out. "Who else?" "Victoria." "Who else?" she said again. Not demanding. Asking. Genuinely asking. He looked at her. She meant it. She was sitting across from him at 2 in the morning, with dried blood on her temple and his work jacket in her lap, and she was asking him to make it real for her. And something about that, the deliberateness of it, the willingness to sit inside something uncomfortable, made him answer. "Dana Ferris," he said. 34. Single mom, 2 kids, 9 and 11. She'd just bought a house 6 months before the closure. First house she'd ever owned. She lost it. A pause. She's working 2 jobs now in Millhaven. Her mother watches the kids. Victoria didn't look away from the fire. But something was happening in her face. Some careful structure behind her eyes was developing cracks. Small ones, the kind that start at the corners and work inward. Marcus Webb. Ethan continued, and his voice was even and low, not prosecutorial, just the voice of a man telling the truth. 61. 3 years from his pension vesting. He had 3 years, and the closure hit before the threshold. He got a partial. Not enough. He paused. He drives a delivery truck now. He's got a bad hip, and he drives a delivery truck, and he doesn't complain because he knows what it means to have a job. Stop, Victoria said. He stopped. She put both hands over her mouth. Both hands pressed together like she was praying or trying to hold something in. Her eyes stayed on the fire, but they weren't seeing it anymore. He waited. I knew, she said finally through her hands. Not the specifics, not Ray or Dana or Marcus, but I knew that real people. I knew what job loss did to real people. I've known that my whole life. Her hands dropped to her lap. My father lost his job when I was 9, textile mill closure. We moved 4 times in 3 years. She stopped, seemed almost surprised she'd said it. I built Hale Industries from almost nothing. And somewhere between the beginning and now She didn't finish. Stopped seeing the floor from the floor, Ethan said quietly. She looked at him. You started seeing it from 30 floors up, he said. Things look different from there. They look like patterns. Yes, she said. The word came out rough. That's exactly what happened. The wind hit the cabin hard, a single massive gust that shook the entire structure and sent something outside clattering. Both of them went rigid. The fire lurched in the stove. The temperature in the room dropped a full degree in the space of a second, and Ethan was on his feet before the sound died away, moving to the stove, adjusting the damper, reading the fire's behavior. We're okay, he said. We're okay. But when he turned back, Victoria's face had gone pale, and not from the cold. She was shaking. Not the small controlled tremors she'd been managing since they came inside. This was different. This was her whole body, a deep internal shiver she was fighting hard to suppress and losing. Her lips had a grayish cast to them. Her hands were gripping the arms of the chair like she was afraid to let go. Ethan crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched in front of her. He put his hand on her forehead, not the cut the other side. Cold. Too cold. And then he took her hand, and her fingers were ice. Victoria, look at me. Her eyes found his, dark and alert, but starting to go glassy at the edges. I'm fine, she said. Old reflex, but it had no force left in it. You're not fine, he said. Your temperature's dropping. He stood up. I need you on the floor, close to the stove. I don't, now, he said. Same voice as outside at the car, not harsh, just the voice of someone who had made a decision and needed her to trust it. She stood, and her legs nearly went. He caught her both hands on her arms, steadying, and she grabbed his forearm with fingers that felt like they'd been left in a freezer, and for a moment they just stood there, while her body figured out which direction was down. I've got you, he said. Slow, right here. He guided her down to the floor in front of the stove. The emergency blanket was on the cot. He grabbed it, grabbed both blankets from the cots, layered them over her. He stoked the fire up to its highest burn. The wood cost be damned, because the wood problem and the hypothermia problem were not actually 2 separate problems. She was sitting with her back against the front leg of a cot, knees drawn up, wrapped in everything they had. The shaking was still there, working through her in waves. He crouched beside her and watched her face, counting the seconds between shiver peaks. Talk to me, he said. Stay with me. I'm not... She stopped, swallowed. I'm not going anywhere. I know. Talk anyway. A pause. Her breath came out in a visible puff. Even with the stove running hot, the cabin temperature had taken a hit from that gust. What do you want me to talk about? Anything. Tell me about your father, the mill. She looked at him. Something about the request, the specific human request, seemed to reach her. He was a good man, she said. Her voice was steadier when she was talking. He knew that. He needed her vocal cords working, needed her brain engaged, needed her focused on something outside the cold. He worked hard. He never complained. When the mill closed, he drove 2 hours each way to a job for almost a year before that one dried up too. She paused. He didn't stop. He just kept driving, kept showing up. Sounds like someone else I know, Ethan said quietly. She almost laughed. It made it further out this time. I wanted to fix it, she said. That's why I built what I built. I wanted to be the one who never had to move again, who never had to... She stopped. Somewhere it turned into something else. What did it turn into? Winning, she said simply. It turned into winning. The shaking was slowing slightly, marginally, but slowing. Better, he asked. A little. She looked at him from inside the blankets. You're still crouching. I'm fine. Ethan. She said his name the same way as before, the deliberate way, the one that meant she was choosing to mean it. Sit down. He sat, cross-legged on the floor beside her, close enough to the stove that the heat was real and immediate. Close enough to her that he'd know if the shaking got worse. Tell me about the plant, she said. Not the closure, the before. He looked at the stove. The before. Yes. How was quiet for a moment. Then, it was loud, he said. All the time, every day, just loud in a way you stopped hearing after a while. The machines had rhythms, different rhythms for different processes. I knew them all. I'd walk the floor in the morning, and I was listening even when I wasn't listening. He paused. The guys, my crew, they were good. People who showed up, who knew what they were doing, who looked out for each other. Ray Kowalski would bring donuts on Fridays every Friday without fail. 30 years of Fridays, I think. He stopped, shook his head slightly. When it was good, it was really good. And when you lost it. It was like losing something that had been load-bearing, he said. Like a wall comes down and suddenly everything shifts, and you don't even know what was being held up until it's gone. Victoria was quiet. Then, I've never had that. A place like that. No, I've had offices, conference rooms. I've had buildings with my name on them. She looked at her hand. The blue was less pronounced, now the blood coming back. But not a place where I knew the rhythms, where people brought donuts on Fridays. She paused. I don't know whether that makes what I did to your plant better or worse. Worse, Ethan said. Honest, no cruelty in it, just honest. She nodded. Yes, I think so too. They sat in silence. The fire burned. The wind moved around the cabin looking for a way in and found none. Then Victoria said very quietly, I'm going to go back. Ethan looked at her. Back where? Crestwood. And the others, there were 4 closures in this region in 5 years. Hale Industries was responsible for 3 of them. She was looking at the fire, and there was something in her face he hadn't seen there before. Not guilt exactly, something more active than guilt. I'm going to go back and actually look at what happened. Not the economic data, the actual people. Why are you telling me this? She looked at him then, direct, unflinching. Because you deserve to hear it from me, directly. Not through a PR statement or a community investment initiative or whatever my team would package it as. She paused. Because you're the one who got out of the truck. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. A long, careful, complicated moment. Don't do it for me, he said. I'm not. Don't do it because you feel guilty. I do feel guilty, she said. But that's not why. She turned back to the fire. I'm doing it because I looked at a spreadsheet and saw a pattern where there were people, and I need to see the people before I forget what they look like entirely. She paused. I think I was close to forgetting. The storm outside made a sound like something enormous exhaling, and in the quiet that followed, Ethan Carter looked at this woman. This woman he had every reason to resent, who had sat across from him and let him make it real, who had asked for names, who had said, I'm going back without being asked, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not all the way. But something. Something that had been locked took one step toward the door. The shaking stopped, he said. She checked herself. Yes, good. He stood up, crossed to the remaining wood, picked up the last two pieces. I'm going to break the table up in about an hour. Forewarn you, it's going to be loud. I'll survive the noise, she said. Yeah, he said. I think you will. He fed the fire. The cabin held. And outside, imperceptibly so slowly, it would be another 2 hours before either of them noticed the storm began, just barely to hesitate. What survives the cold? The table broke easier than he expected. Ethan had warned her. It would be loud, and it was the first leg came off with a crack that shot through the cabin like a gunshot, and Victoria flinched hard, her hand flying to her chest before she caught herself and leveled out. He looked at her across the room. She nodded once. Keep going. He kept going. 4 legs and the tabletop in pieces. Enough wood to carry them through to morning if the storm cooperated even slightly. He stacked the pieces by the stove and fed 2 in and sat back down on the floor beside her. She hadn't moved back to the chair. She was still on the floor with her back against the cot frame, both blankets around her shoulders, watching him work with the kind of focused attention of someone who had spent the last hour realizing how many things they didn't know how to do. You didn't hesitate, she said. It's a table. It's someone's property. It's wood, he said. And we needed wood. Those are the only 2 facts that matter right now. She looked at the pile of broken furniture. I would have hesitated. I know. I would have weighed the legal exposure, She stopped herself, almost laughed at herself, which was new. I would have made it complicated. Most things aren't as complicated as we make them, Ethan said. When it's cold and you need heat, you burn the table. That's it. She was quiet for a moment. Is that how you've been living since Crestwood? He thought about it. Really thought about it. Yeah, he said. Pretty much. You figure out what's real fast, and you deal with what's real, and you stop spending energy on everything else. That sounds exhausting. It sounds exhausting from the outside, he said. From the inside, it's actually simpler. Cleaner. He paused. You know exactly what matters. There's no noise. Victoria looked at her hands, the color fully back in them now, the blue gone, the fingers no longer rigid. She turned them over slowly, like she was examining something she'd stopped paying attention to. I have noise, she said. Constant noise. Emails at midnight. Board calls on Sundays. 15 people who need a decision before they can do anything. She closed her hands. I haven't had a quiet morning in 6 years. Do you want one? She looked up. The question had landed somewhere she hadn't expected. He could see it, the slight widening, the half-second of genuine surprise before the composure reasserted. I don't know, she said. I'm not sure I know how to want things anymore. I know how to optimize them. I know how to schedule them. She paused. But want them? Ethan looked at the fire. Sophie wants things, he said. She wants pancakes on Saturday mornings. She wants to stay up late enough to see the first star. She wants me to read the same 3 books on rotation for months at a time until I have them memorized. He smiled, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. She's never optimized a single thing in her life. She sounds like the healthiest person in your story, Victoria said softly. She's the healthiest person I know. The fire had steadied. The cabin temperature had climbed back to something defensible, not warm exactly, but survivable without a fight. Victoria had stopped shaking 40 minutes ago and had not started again. He was watching for it, cataloging every sign, running the quiet background assessment of someone responsible for whether another person made it through the night. She caught him watching. I'm all right, she said. I know. You're still watching me. Habit, he said. I watch things. Your crew at the plant. Yeah, and Sophie, and the fire. He gestured at the stove. You watch what matters. Something moved through her face at that. She looked away toward the dark window, where the storm still pressed its cold white weight against the glass, and he had the sense that what he'd just said had landed somewhere she wasn't ready to examine out loud yet. He let it go. The fire popped and settled. Then Victoria said, I had a daughter. The cabin went very still. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, just waited, because there was a tone of voice that required only witness, and this was it. She was born early, Victoria said. 26 weeks. She lived for 11 days. Her voice was level in the way voices go level when the grief is old enough to have built its own infrastructure, still there, still massive but organized now. Contained. Her name was Claire. I'm sorry, Ethan said. And he meant it the way you only mean it when you understand exactly what the weight of a name can hold. It was 9 years ago, Victoria said. My marriage didn't survive it. Most marriages don't. She paused. And I went back to work. I went back to work 3 weeks after I buried my daughter, because I didn't know what else to do with my body, with my hands, with the hours. She turned and looked at him directly. I became very good at making decisions after that. Very fast, very clean. Because the alternative was feeling things, and feeling things had almost destroyed me. The truth of it landed in the room like a third person. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. He stared at the fire and let the silence be what it needed to be. Then quietly, so you built walls. I built an empire, she said. Which is just a very expensive wall. He looked at her. And for the first time since he'd seen her face through that iced-over car window, since he'd heard her name and felt that cold recognition go through him, he saw her. Not Victoria Hale, the CEO. Not the name on the closure notice. Not the person responsible for Ray Kowalski's house, or Dana Ferris's foreclosure, or Marcus Webb's partial pension. A woman who had buried a child and put herself back together around the wound and built something enormous to fill the space, and had somehow arrived here in this cabin on this night, sitting on a plank floor with a stranger's jacket across her lap, finally running out of room to hide. Her name was Claire, he said. She looked at him. You said it once, he said. I wanted to say it back, so it's real in the room. Victoria Hale's composure, that extraordinary expensive years in the making composure, cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. It cracked the way good things crack under real pressure, all at once, clean through, and then the pieces just sitting there and the woman underneath them completely exposed and not running. Her eyes filled. She didn't wipe them. She let them fill and let one go and breathed through it with her jaw set and her hands still in her lap. Thank you, she said. Her voice was wrecked and real and more human than anything she'd said in the last 8 hours. Yeah, he said. They sat together in the firelight, and the storm leaned on the walls, and neither of them spoke for a long time. And it was the most honest silence Ethan Carter had sat in since he'd been in his truck in his driveway 3 years ago, trying to find the courage to walk inside. Then his phone lit up on the floor between them. 1 bar. Half a bar. Flickering. But there. He grabbed it. Victoria sat up straight beside him. Both of them suddenly alert the intimacy of the moment, snapping into something practical and urgent. He hit his mother's number. It rang twice, and then his mother's voice, tight and awake, absolutely awake at 3:40 in the morning, said, Ethan, oh thank God, where are you? Ranger Station on Harlan Pass. I'm fine. I have someone with me, another stranded driver. We're okay, Mom. Is Sophie? She's asleep. She fought until about midnight, and then she just... His mother's voice broke slightly. She made me promise to leave the porch light on. Something hit him square in the chest. Leave it on, he said. I'll be home in the morning. The roads. I'll wait for daylight and the plows. We're safe. There's a wood stove. We're okay. He heard her breath, the long, slow exhale of someone who had been holding it for hours. Go to sleep, Mom. Ethan, go to sleep. I'll call when I'm moving. He hung up, looked at Victoria. Signals back, partially. She already had her phone up. The screen lit her face, and he watched her cycle through what must have been 30 or 40 notifications, scanning fast, the CEO reassembling itself in real time over the woman who'd been sitting on the floor a moment ago. Her thumb moved, and she lifted the phone to her ear and said, Margaret, I'm safe. A pause. I know I'm sorry. Cancel the search. I'm at the Harlan Pass Ranger Station with a... She glanced at him, with someone who stopped to help. I'll need extraction in the morning when the roads are passable. Another pause. Margaret, I'm fine. Stop crying and go back to sleep. She lowered the phone. The signal bar disappeared. Both of them looked at their phones for a moment, then at each other. Search and rescue was 20 minutes out, Victoria said. Good. They'll come at first light regardless. Good, he said again, and meant it not as dismissal, but as relief. Real relief. Because he was tired and his back ached from the chair, and he had been running on pure focus and adrenaline for 6 hours, and knowing that morning had a plan made everything in his body want to finally stand down. He put another piece of the broken table into the stove. Victoria pulled the blankets tighter. Ethan. Yeah, I need to tell you something. She said it carefully, like someone who had rehearsed the opening and wasn't sure about everything after it. And I need you to let me finish before you respond. He looked at her. Okay. Hale Industries has a community reinvestment fund. It's not small. It was created 3 years ago for exactly the kind of regional economic disruption that our decisions caused, and it has not been deployed. It has been sitting in a fund managed growing, while Margaret and my legal team and I argued about the appropriate framework for deployment. She stopped. That's unconscionable. I knew it was unconscionable when we started the argument, and I let the argument continue anyway, because deploying capital means accountability, and accountability was. She stopped again. I was protecting myself. Ethan said nothing. Ray Kowalski, she said. Dana Ferris, Marcus Webb. There are people like them in every town we touched, and there is money that was intended for them sitting in an account doing nothing but making my quarterly statements look responsible. Her jaw tightened. I'm going to fix that. Not because you're sitting here. Not because I feel guilty, though I do. But because it is the right thing, and I have been choosing the comfortable thing instead, and this. She looked at the cabin walls, at the broken table, at the stove, at him. This has made the comfortable thing feel very small. He looked at her for a long time. Why are you telling me? He asked. Because I told you I'd go back, and I meant it, and I want someone to know I meant it before I walk out of here, and back into a world where it's very easy to mean things inside a crisis, and then unmean them slowly over the following weeks. You want me to hold you to it? I want yes. In whatever small way one person can hold another to something when they'll never see each other again. Yes. Ethan was quiet. The fire burned. The storm outside had shifted register, not gone but lower. Less furious. Like something that had been running hard and was beginning to remember it had limits. You'll see each other again, he said. She looked at him. You said you're going to Crestwood, he said. I live 15 miles from Crestwood. A long beat. Yes, she said. I suppose that's true. Then you don't need me to hold you to it from a distance, he said. Just do it. She looked at him with something in her face that was complicated and layered and real gratitude that didn't know how to sit next to guilt, which was sitting next to something that might have been the beginning of hope. It was a lot for one face to hold. She held it. You're a very difficult person to be angry at, she said finally. You're not the first person to say that. I imagine not. She looked at the fire. I was angry at you, earlier, when you said the things about the numbers the way they looked like patterns from 30 floors up. She paused. I was angry because it was accurate. Yeah. I didn't show it. I noticed. She looked at him. You noticed a lot. Habit, he said again. I watch what matters. There it was again, that phrase landing in the same place. She didn't look away this time. She let it land and stayed with it. I think, she said slowly, carefully, that at some point in the last several years I stopped watching what matters. A pause. And started watching what numbers. Yeah, Ethan said. I think so too. I don't know how to go back to the way of looking at things where people are people first. You already started, he said. You asked for names. She was quiet. That's how it starts, he said. You ask for names. You say the names back. You let the names be real. He paused. Claire was real. Victoria closed her eyes. 1 breath. 2. She opened them. Yes, she said. She was. The wind made one last push against the cabin hard, serious everything it had, and then fell back. And in the quiet that followed, something became audible that hadn't been audible all night. Something that Ethan heard and then couldn't stop hearing, because once you heard it, you understood what had been missing. Silence. The real kind. The kind that wasn't filled with wind and warning, and the structural groan of things under pressure. Just stillness. The storm was not over, but it had broken its back on this mountain, and they had waited it out, and on the other side of this particular wall was morning. Victoria heard it too. He could see it on her face, the slight lift, the recalibration. "Is that?" "Yeah," he said. "That's the other side." She exhaled something she'd been carrying all night. He added the last piece of broken table to the fire and watched it catch and leaned back against the cot frame beside her, not touching. Just the closeness of two people who had been through something real together and didn't need to perform the distance anymore. "Try to sleep," he said. "A couple hours. Rescue will come at first light." "What about you?" "I'll be here." She looked at him, one long full look, the kind she'd been rationing all night. "Ethan Carter," she said. "You are an extraordinarily decent man." He thought about Sophie at the window, the porch light on, the yellow pajamas and the stuffed rabbit, and the fog circles on the glass. "I'm just a dad," he said, "trying to get home." Victoria leaned her head back against the cot frame. Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed, and Ethan Carter sat by what remained of the fire, watching it burn down to coals, counting the minutes to morning. Thinking of nothing except the porch light in the window and the face pressed against the glass, waiting for his headlights to come up the drive. The storm was over. Morning was coming, and two people who had walked into this night as symbols of each other's pain were going to walk out of it as something else entirely. Though neither of them had a word for it yet, and maybe that was exactly right. Some things don't need a name, they just need to be true. The morning after the mountain. He heard the helicopter before he saw any light, a distant thrum, mechanical, purposeful, cutting through the post-storm silence, like something that had been sent with intention. Ethan was already awake. He hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of something thin and restless in the chair, feeding the coals every time they threatened to go cold, watching Victoria breathe. When the sound reached him, he stood up slowly, his back protesting every inch of the movement, and crossed to the window and scraped the ice film with his thumbnail until he could see through. Gray light. The particular gray of 5:30 in the morning, after a storm, flat and clean and carrying no promises yet, but not lying to you either. The snow had stopped. The world outside was still and white and buried under more than he'd expected, and above the tree line, a single light was moving. Blinking. Coming closer. "Victoria," he said. She was awake before he finished the word. That was something he'd noticed about her. She didn't surface slowly. She came back sharp, like someone who had trained herself never to be fully gone. "I hear it," she said. She was on her feet, the blankets falling away, running her hands through her hair in a quick automatic motion that was so purely human, so completely un-CEO, just a woman waking up and trying to put herself together, that it almost made him smile. "How do we signal them?" she asked. "I've got a flare in the emergency kit." "Of course you do." He grabbed the kit. She was already moving to the door. He caught her arm, not hard, just a touch, just enough. "Coat," he said. He held out his jacket. She looked at it, then at him. "You'll freeze." "I've got a flannel and stubbornness," he said. "It's enough. Put it on." She put it on. It was too big across the shoulders and hit her mid-thigh, and she looked completely wrong in it and didn't say a word about it, just zipped it to her chin and nodded. He opened the door. The cold was a wall, but a clean wall, not a violent one. The storm's anger was spent. What remained was just winter, ordinary and honest, and something a person could negotiate with. He stepped out into calf-deep snow and pulled the flare from the kit and struck it and held it up, and the helicopter banked toward them inside of 30 seconds. He felt Victoria step out beside him. He felt the warmth of her standing close in the cold, his jacket around her, both of them watching that light in the gray sky come in low and direct. And he thought just for a second that this was going to be the last moment of whatever this was. The thing that had no name. Once that helicopter landed, the world would come back in. Margaret and board calls and legal teams and PR statements, and the ordinary machinery of two lives that had nothing to do with each other, would reassemble itself around them. And this, the fire and the floor, and Claire's name in the room, and Sophie at the window would become a story they each carried privately. I was surprised by how much he didn't want that to happen yet. The helicopter came down in this clearing beyond the tree line. Two people jumped out before the rotors had fully slowed search and rescue orange gear moving fast across the snow toward them. Ms. Hale. The first one reached them out of breath, eyes already doing a quick medical assessment. Are you injured? Head laceration treated, Victoria said. Clipped. Efficient. No loss of consciousness. Mild hypothermia resolved. I'm mobile. The rescuer looked at Ethan. And you, sir? Fine, Ethan said. I'm fine. The second rescuer was already on a radio calling in their status. The first one was guiding Victoria gently but firmly toward the helicopter. One hand at her elbow, and Victoria was cooperating, moving, but she turned her head back toward Ethan, and the look on her face in that moment was something he didn't have a category for. Not gratitude bigger than that. Not guilt cleaner than that. Something that was still in the process of becoming something. My truck, he said. Roads won't be passable for another 2-3 hours, the second rescuer said. We can take you down to the base, someone can drive you back up for the vehicle. Or, Victoria said, and she said it firmly back to the full register of a woman who was used to people doing what she said. We take him home first. He has a daughter waiting. The rescuer looked between them. Ma'am, the protocol is flexible, Victoria said. I own a helicopter. I know how protocols work. A pause. The rescuer looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Victoria. She looked back at him with an expression that said clearly, and without any possibility of misunderstanding, don't argue with me about this one. He didn't argue. 20 minutes later, he was looking down at Harlan Pass from the air, the buried road, the gap in the guardrail where Victoria's SUV had gone over the dark thread of the path he'd walked through the storm to get her to the cabin. From up here, it looked small, manageable. The way things always looked from 30 floors up, he thought, and then caught himself, because that wasn't fair. Or maybe it was. But the point was, the distance changed, what you could see, not the truth of what was there. He looked away from the window. Victoria was sitting across from him in the helicopter cabin wrapped in a proper rescue blanket, now a medic pressing a fresh bandage to her temple, her phone already in her hand. Margaret's voice coming through the speaker in a rapid, compressed stream of logistics and rescheduled meetings and press inquiries that Victoria was fielding with one-word answers. She looked up once and caught him watching, and something moved across her face, an acknowledgement, a flicker of something underneath the CEO surface that said, I know what's happening. I'm not disappearing into it. He believed her. He wasn't sure why, but he did. The helicopter banked south following the valley, and 15 minutes later, Ethan saw it through the window. The town, his street, his house. The small yellow square of the porch light still burning in the morning gray. His chest did something complicated and complete. The helicopter couldn't land on his street. They put down in the elementary school parking lot 3 blocks over the same parking lot where he'd watched Sophie in her first ever school play, standing at the back in his work clothes, still dirty from the job, crying behind his hand at a 6-year-old in a cardboard crown declaring herself the queen of the autumn leaves. He unbuckled, grabbed his emergency kit, turned to Victoria. She had lowered her phone. Margaret's voice had stopped. She was looking at him with her full attention, both of them aware that this was the moment, the actual one, the end of the thing that had no name. He didn't know what to say. He'd spent the whole flight trying to figure out what to say, and had arrived here with nothing that felt sufficient. So he said the true thing instead. Take care of yourself. She looked at him. That's all. It's the most important thing. She was quiet for a beat. Then, I meant what I said. About going back. About the fund. She held his gaze. Ray Kowalski, Dana Ferris, Marcus Webb. I'm going to say their names to my board. Yeah, he said. I think you will. You believe me. I believe you asked for their names, he said. That's enough to start. Her jaw tightened, not against emotion this time, but around it, holding it steady. You didn't just save my life last night, she said. I did what anyone. Don't, she said, firm. Don't shrink it down. I need you to hear this. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees close enough that the medic beside her shifted discreetly away. You got out of a truck in a blizzard for someone who had taken something real from you. You kept her alive. You fed her names and let her sit inside what she'd done, and you didn't let her hide from it, but you didn't destroy her either. She stopped. That is not nothing. That is not what anyone would do. Ethan looked at her. You would have done it, he said, given the same circumstance. I don't know that. I do, he said, because you asked for the names. Someone who wouldn't have stopped, they don't ask for names. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that the medic glanced between them and then studied the ceiling. Long enough that the pilot cleared his throat quietly. Then, Victoria Hale did something that he would think about for a long time afterward, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. She reached out and put her hand briefly over his. Just for a second. Warm, firm, real. Go home to your daughter, she said. He got out. The cold hit him again, and he walked across the parking lot and heard the helicopter lift behind him and did not turn around and watched it rise in the corner of his vision as he walked going up and south and eventually out of sight behind the tree line. He stood on the sidewalk in front of his house for a moment. The porch light was on. He'd been gone 18 hours. His truck was still on a mountain. He had no phone signal and a dead flashlight and the same clothes he'd left in yesterday morning, and he smelled like wood smoke and cold air. He had exactly $7 in his wallet and his next job didn't start until Thursday. None of that mattered even a little. He walked up the porch steps and opened the front door. The house was warm. It smelled like coffee, and his mother's particular brand of pine-scented cleaner, and something else underneath both of those things. Something that was just home. Just the accumulation of years of living in a space and filling it with the specific texture of your life. And you only really registered it when you'd been away from it long enough to be afraid you might not get back. He heard his mother's voice from the kitchen. Ethan. And then fast, small footsteps, and then Sophie came around the corner at full speed in her yellow duck pajamas, hair everywhere. One sock half off, and she hit him at knee level with her full body weight and wrapped both arms around his legs and didn't say anything at all. He reached down and picked her up, all of her every pound, even though his back was wrecked and he'd carry it for a week. She wrapped her arms around his neck and her legs around his middle and put her face against his shoulder, and he held on with everything he had. Hi, baby, he said. His voice was wrecked. He didn't try to fix it. You didn't come home, she said, into his shoulder, muffled. I know, I got stuck in the snow. Grandma said. Yeah. She said you were okay. I was okay. She lifted her head and looked at his face, checking. That serious 6-year-old assessment that saw more than it should. She reached up and touched his cheek with one small hand. You look tired. I am tired. Did you sleep? A little. She considered this. Then, I left the light on. I know, he said. I saw it. She nodded, satisfied. As though the light had been the actual mechanism of his survival, and she had known it all along. She put her head back on his shoulder. Don't get stuck again, she said. I'll do my best. His mother appeared in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who had been awake all night and was running on relief and caffeine and 40 years of loving this particular difficult son. She handed him a cup without a word. He took it with the arm that wasn't holding Sophie. She touched his face once with her palm, brief, certain the same gesture Sophie had just made, and he understood in that moment where Sophie had learned it. Sit down, his mother said. I'll make eggs. He sat down at the kitchen table with Sophie still attached to him, and drank the coffee and let the warmth of the house and the ordinary sounds of morning settle around him like something he'd earned. Sophie was already asking about breakfast, about what happened to the truck, about whether the snow was deep enough to make a fort cycling through. Questions the way she always did when she'd been worried and was now using words to push the worry out. He answered everyone, and somewhere in the back of his mind, quiet and separate from the eggs and the coffee and Sophie's voice, he thought about a woman in a helicopter going back to a world that was going to look very different to her than it had 24 hours ago. He thought about a name said in a cold room, Claire, and the way it had cracked something open that might if she let it stay open. He thought about Ray Kowalski and Dana Ferris and Marcus Webb, and whether their names would make it to a boardroom, and whether names in a boardroom could do anything real. I didn't know. He'd probably never know for certain. But he thought about the moment she'd asked, "Give me a name, one real person," and he thought about how you could track almost everything important about a human being to the questions they chose to ask when the armor was gone, and the storm was outside, and there was nowhere left to hide. She had asked for names. That mattered. He still believed that. 3 days later, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He was under a sink in a commercial building and Kellerton flashlight in his teeth, and the phone was in his back pocket vibrating against the pipe, and he had exactly 3 more connections to make before he could call this job done. He answered anyway. "Mr. Carter." A woman's voice. Professional, measured, but not cold. "My name is Margaret Chen. I'm Victoria Hale's executive assistant. Ms. Hale asked me to reach out." He pulled himself out from under the sink, sat up. "Okay. She wanted me to let you know that the Hale Community Reinvestment Fund has been formally activated. The first disbursement is targeted at 3 regions, and Crestwood is first on the list." A pause. "She also asked me to personally connect you with the fund director, who will be reaching out to community members directly," she said. A slight pause, like Margaret was reading something, making sure she got it right. "She said to tell you that she's saying the names to the board. All of them." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Carter." "Yeah," he said. "I heard you." He cleared his throat. Tell her good. Just good." He thought about it, about everything that word was carrying. "Yeah," he said. "She'll know what it means." A week after that, there was a knock at his door on a Saturday morning. Sophie got there first, because Sophie always got there first, and Ethan heard her open it, and then heard her say in the particular tone of a child confronted with an unexpected and interesting stranger, "Who are you?" And he heard a woman's voice say, with a warmth that he recognized because he'd heard it find its way to the surface through 8 hours of a blizzard. "My name is Victoria. I knew your dad when he was stuck in the snow." Sophie considered this seriously. "He said he was okay." "He was," Victoria said. "He was the most okay person there." And then Sophie said with the absolute authority of someone who had thought about this, "Do you want to come in? Grandma made pancakes." Ethan stood in the hallway of his house and heard the door open wider, and heard Sophie's feet on the floor, leading someone toward the kitchen, and heard his mother say hello, in the careful tone of someone taking quick measure of a situation. And he stood there for one more second, just one, with his coffee in his hand and the Saturday morning light coming through the window. I wasn't sure what this was yet. He wasn't sure what it was going to be. He only knew that a woman had walked toward his door and knocked on it, and his daughter had opened it, and that was a beginning. And beginnings didn't need to be certain to be real. He walked into the kitchen. Victoria was standing at the table, still in her coat, holding a bakery box tied with string, something she'd brought and hadn't mentioned, just arrived with quietly. She looked up when he came in. That direct look. No armor, no calculation, no composure being managed. Just a person standing in someone else's kitchen on a Saturday morning, not entirely sure of her welcome, and choosing to be there anyway. "I should have called," she said. "Probably," he said. "I was afraid I'd find a reason not to come if I called." "Yeah," he said. "That sounds right." Sophie appeared at Victoria's elbow, having materialized silently in the way she always did, and looked up at the box. "What's in there?" "Donuts," Victoria said. She looked at Ethan. "I was told someone used to bring donuts on Fridays." The kitchen went quiet. His mother turned from the stove with the expression of a woman who was filing a great deal of information away for later. Sophie made a sound of pure satisfaction and grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward a chair. Victoria let herself be pulled. Ethan set his coffee down. He looked at this woman who had cost him something real, who had sat in the dark with her hands over her mouth and asked for names and said them back and burned furniture to stay warm, and told him about a daughter named Claire, and then gone back to her world and done the things she'd said she would do, who had knocked on his door on a Saturday with donuts and something still unfinished in her eyes. He looked at Sophie climbing into the chair beside her, already talking, already explaining the very important rules of Saturday pancake breakfast, already completely unafraid of this new person, the way 6-year-olds are when they have enough love in their life to be generous with their trust. He thought about the porch light, about the drives home, about the thing his wife used to say, that kindness wasn't soft, it was structural. It was the thing that held everything else up. She'd been right. She was usually right. He pulled out the chair across from Victoria and sat down. "Thank you for coming," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you for stopping," she said. And the morning came in through the windows, and the pancakes hit the table, and Sophie talked without taking a breath. And Ethan Carter, single father, plant floor supervisor, maintenance man. Man who stopped on a mountain road in a blizzard, sat at his own kitchen table, and felt for the first time in a very long time, like every hard thing had been building toward exactly this. Not toward a woman at the table. Not toward an apology or a reinvestment fund or any particular resolution. Toward this: a morning. A daughter. A porch light that was finally off because it had done its job. And the certainty, quiet and load-bearing and completely unshakable, that stopping for another person always, no matter the cost, was never the wrong thing. It was the only thing. It was everything.